Before we start, I just want to sing a song. Let's sing the morning song. Just so many opportunities that come with each day, with each morning, that sometimes I forget about. So I always like to sing this song just to pull me back to being centered, where I can always remember all of the great things that come with each day. When they are, when they are old, when they are, when they are, oh, 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 hey, oh, hey, oh, yeah, when they are, when they are, when they are, when they are, oh, 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 hey, when they are, when they are, when they are, when they are, oh, 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 hey, when they are, when they are, when they are, when they are, oh, 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 hey, all right. So when we sing, when we play our drums, it's a form of prayer. So it was an honor for me to sing and pray for you and us today. And that beat of the drum, it represents a heartbeat of our mother, the earth. So when we sing and when we drum, it always keeps us connected to creation and to our mother, the earth. My name is Clarence Cachagee, and well, it depends on which hat I'm wearing on the day. I work for Conestoga College. I'm the Indigenous Services Coordinator for the Waterloo campus, and I am also the founder and visionary behind Crowshield Lodge. My other name is Kiwe Tinwe Inane. That's my spirit name. That translates into North Windman. I'm from the people of the Mushkegawak, people of the river, Fox Lake Reserve, Chapleau Cree First Nation Bear Clan, and I am a beautiful person.
Welcome to Bonn Park.
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 Marshall, we're up to some cool stuff this month.
We sure are.
We have a new website launching.
We've got a giant 3-prize giveaway.
And I'm talking giant. Our community has been incredibly supportive for this big web launch at the end of July, where we're going to have a special 150th episode for everyone.
And we've been nominated for a Waterloo Region Record Reader's Choice Award.
Vote for us on the Records Reader's Choice Awards page or find the link on our Instagram bio, Twitter, and Facebook. We'd love to see your support. Thank you.
Thanks.
On with the show. This is it. We first heard about you, Clarence, when Marshall and I were pitching an idea for a podcast to the KW Awesome Project, I believe is the name.
I think so, yep.
It's this really cool initiative where they give $1,000 out to anyone who is sort of brave enough to tell their story and come on and get invited to talk about what they think that small grant should be used for. And somebody was coming and speaking on behalf of, I think, House of Friendship, the fact that they could have an opportunity to get some relief from the pressures of working through COVID and working through some tough times, working through this government, and have a retreat with you at Crow Shield Lodge. There were a few people that went before Marshall and I. Marshall and I were on to talk about, we wanted to do this 2-part series about people who bleed and menstrual equity and all these different types of issues that we had this idea about, which is also an important cause. But as soon as we heard some of the other stories, we knew this was not our grant to get. There was so many, much more immediate need of these funds than we were. And we were so happy that it went to that project that brought people to you. We heard a little bit in that time about what it is you do, but why don't you unpack this for us and tell us what is Crow Shield Lodge?
I can do that to the best of my ability. Before I go into unpacking that in regards to Crow Shield Lodge, I just need to share that I need to acknowledge all those mentors, and I need to acknowledge all those teachers in my life that have invested their time in me. If it wasn't for those individuals who have walked with me, who have lifted me up, who have guided me, I wouldn't be here today. So I always need to acknowledge those mentors and those teachers in my life that invested their time in me so that I could reconnect with my culture. So I just want to say that. So what is Crow Shield Lodge? Great question. I can't say enough about that organization, KW Awesome, and how they helped out those outreach workers, which the story that you heard, I think they secured some money, and with securing those funds, they actually helped Crow Shield Lodge. And we gave those frontline workers 2 sessions. We invited them out to Crow Shield Lodge. We created a safe and welcoming space where we can lean into those hard discussions. At Crow Shield Lodge, we never call anybody out, but what we do is we call them in. We call them in so we can have those discussions. And what those frontline workers needed at that time, they needed a safe and welcoming space, which where we had some medicines and where we had some sacred objects, and they needed that space so that they could start unpacking the things that they were seeing in the community, and so that they could start releasing some of those things that they picked up during their work time. So what is Crow Shield Lodge? Crow Shield Lodge, it sits on 4 pillars, which is healing, education, land stewardship, and reconciliation. I threw that last word in there, reconciliation, to give people a starting point. That word reconciliation, there's always another word that comes with it, truth and reconciliation. We're in the truth part right now, and we're going to be in the truth part for a very long time. It's going to take 7 generations until things can be reconciled. So let's talk about the truth, and let's talk about allyship, because that's more attainable than reconciliation right now at this point in time. So what do? We have groups out there, we have organizations, we have schools, we have churches, we have colleges, we have universities, we've had international students out there, and we reconnect them to the land. Because that's what my hope was. My hope was that I was seeing that not only with myself, but with other urban Indigenous people, one of the biggest barriers that we have always faced was a connection to the land. All of this land that we're on, we used to be able to roam freely on it. And as Indigenous people, we're land-based people. So we have the deepest, utmost respect and connection to the land. But we were always faced with, I'm sorry, but we don't have the capacity, or we don't have the land to offer you individuals so that you can be who you are, and so that you can do the ceremonies that help you stay aligned with your culture. But with bringing people back out to the land, we ran a pilot project a couple of years ago out in Aramosa, Eden. And that's where it was just called the Lodge. We ran it with a retreat center out there, and we built a teaching lodge, and we were doing monthly sweats out there. But in time, we found that we weren't walking down the same path as when we started our relationship. So with having that awareness, I made the decision to stop investing at that retreat center outside of Guelph in Eden Mills. And then I started talking to some of my supports, and they said, well, Clarence, why don't we try to figure out a way to bring the lodge back to Waterloo Region? I said, yes, that would be amazing. Let's try to find a pathway to make that happen. So within time, I just started talking to my friends. I started talking to my mentors and to my supports. And I have one friend who's an ecologist, and he gave me a few emails to connect with. He said, here's about 3 emails. Why don't you try these? I think they're good people. I don't know them personally, but they might be receptive to your ask. So the first email that I sent out was to the Fennings outside of New Hamburg, and they're the organic farmers. I think they're pretty much the biggest organic farmer in our region. And I think within a couple hours, I got a reply back. And it was Jen Fenning saying, yes, why don't we meet? So my partner and I, we went out there and we met with Jen and her husband, Eck, and we had some conversations. And she said, this aligns with what we want to do, and this aligns with what we are hoping to do, not only for Indigenous people, but for Indigenous organizations. Because they have a surplus of land and they wanted to find a way that they could share it with us. So we went back a couple days later or a week later, and they showed us a couple potential sites. The Nith River runs through their property. I don't know if you know much about the Nith River, but it can flood. And when it floods, it's pretty powerful. And we didn't want to keep rebuilding every season because the first potential sites that they showed us, it was beautiful land, but it was in a floodplain. And then they said, well, Clarence, we do have some other property, and we have this other site, which is in the back of our, in the back bush, in the back forest of one of our fields on one of our farms. So we went and looked at it. And as soon as we went and looked at that property in the bush, it felt right. It felt good, and it felt like this is where we are going to build Crowshield Lodge. Now with changing the branding from the lodge to Crowshield Lodge, what we had to do is I wanted to honor my father. My father has been gone now for 30 years. He was in the residential schools. Residential schools had a horrendous impact on his life. But my dad always used to call me Crowshield and Family before I received my spirit name. So whenever he'd write us letters or cards for my children or myself, he'd always put Crowshield and Family, Crowshield. So that was a name that my father gifted me. And the crow is our family totem. So I'm constantly saying hello to crows whenever they show up, and at a lot of our gatherings at Crowshield Lodge, the crows do show up, which is beautiful. So we met with our lawyer. And he said, Clarence, the lodge is a good name, but it has to be something lodge. And then I just thought, well, how could I honor my father? So I said, could it be Crowshield Lodge? And the lawyer said, yes, let's go with that name. It's going to be called Crowshield Lodge. So that's how Crowshield Lodge came to be. And then the Fennings, they actually said, yes, we want to start working with you. And we found that location. So then I asked four women to come together. Jen Fenning was one of them. The other 3 women were Indigenous. I gave them all a gift. I gave them some tobacco to connect with the spirit of the land and connect with the spirit of each other. And I asked them if they could find the locations for the teaching lodge, for the teepee, for the wall tent, and a location to do our sweats. And within a couple hours, those women came back and they found those locations. And it was so beautiful because then we slowly and mindfully and very respectfully started preparing that land for those 4 structures. And those 4 structures actually pair up with the 4 pillars. You know, the 4 pillars of Crowshield Lodge is healing, education, land stewardship, and reconciliation. And those 4 pillars pair up with those 4 structures. Once we started preparing the land, and we did it in a very mindful and respectful way. We only went out there for 4 hours every day, and we went out once a week. We could have gathered about 50 to 100 people, and we could have got it all done in one weekend, but that's not the way we do things. Because we're going into a very delicate ecosystem that is not ours, and everything is interconnected. So if we take just one thing away from that system, it's going to impact the other plants, the other trees, the other medicines. So we put a lot of tobacco down, we said a lot of prayers, and then mindfully and respectfully, we started preparing those sites. And we go in for 4 hours with a crew of about 20, 25 people. After 4 hours, we would come out, we would have a feast, and then a week or two later, we would go back. And then after about 2 months, we had all of those structures up. They were all erected, and then we started doing sweats. And then we started to offer programming through workshops for community members. We started offering programming to schools. We started offering programming to private organizations, to colleges, to universities, to faith-based groups. And then in October of last year, we wanted to figure out a way where we could start to connect with all of the leaders in our community. We did have the Crime Prevention Council out, which brought a lot of our community leaders out, but we wanted to start focusing on the different sectors within our region and how we could start inviting those community leaders out. So in October, we put together an awareness workshop. And we just started inviting out CEOs, executive directors, regional chairs, counselors. And we wanted to start giving them an experience that they never had before. So in the month of October, those four Saturdays of last year, the first workshop that we had was on allyship. Brought in 2 facilitators. One was an Indigenous woman, one was a settler, and they facilitated, and it was amazing. It was amazing. Then the second workshop we did was on reconciliation, and Jen Fenning was one of the facilitators. Because who better to facilitate than Jen Fenning when you want to talk about reconciliation? The third workshop that we put together was on the child welfare system, because we have to start talking about those truths. And that's what we do at Crowshield Lodge. We don't blame or shame anybody, but we do talk about the truths that have happened to the Indigenous people in this country and in North America. So that was a hit. And then the fourth workshop that we put on with that awareness series was on new beginnings. And it just took off, doing those 4 workshops back to back. It gave Crowshield Lodge a foundation to work from, but it also put us on the map in our region. So then after time, during the winter, COVID hit again. And then we're thinking, well, we still want to connect with people. We still want to meet with them. So we started streaming live from our teepee last winter. And we started bringing out couples, and we just did interviews with them. We just gave them a platform, and we said, this is your time. You can talk about whatever you want. And it was amazing because we brought out just a couple who were Indigenous, and they shared with us for about an hour and a half through their lens about things that they were experiencing. We also brought out a Black Indigenous woman who shared her experience. And it was really good that we were still connecting with these individuals. We didn't want to go to live streaming because that's not the way we do things, but we still wanted to connect, and we still wanted to make sure that we had these people connected to us. And at Crowshield Lodge, the one thing that we want to give is a sense of belonging. We want to give a sense of belonging to Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, and we want to bring them together to heal. Because today I have a basic understanding that to be broken is to be ordinary. I believe that everybody's broken in one way, shape, or form. This is through my lens. When I came to terms with my brokenness, the shame was lifted, and I was able to start working on things that didn't belong to me, things that I inherited from my ancestors, things that I inherited through conditioning. You know, I'm not even from here. I'm as you see from when I introduced myself, I'm from Fox Lake, Chapleau Cree First Nation. I ended up here because I'm part of the 60 Scoop. My sister and I, we were displaced at a very early age. And we were moved around to some places around Toronto. And we were even adopted once. And then we were put back into the system. And then they moved us to a different region, which is Waterloo region. And they put us in the paper as today's child. So I don't know if you remember that back in the 70s, they had clippings of foster children and they would put them in the paper. So that's how my sister and I ended up here. And eventually we ended up on a farm outside of New Dundee, which is about half an hour outside of Kitchener. And my sister and I, we were raised by New Order Mennonites. So that's how I ended up here. I cannot say enough about Waterloo region and the deep, deep sense of belonging that I have here. It's really strange because I go back to my reserve once or twice. My sister lives there. I have cousins, I have uncles, I have aunts that live there. Maybe that's where I'm from, but this is where I want to make my home because this is where I was brought up. This is where I have a deep, deep sense of belonging. This is where I have a connectedness that I have nowhere else. So I've made a decision that I want to invest my time in Waterloo region, and I want to make some changes. So that's what I do. That's what I do. I find gaps in systems. I talk about them. A lot of it has to do with addiction. A lot of it has to do with trauma. A lot of it has to do with Indigenous related issues. That's what I know. That's what I know. I did frontline work for 9 years. I got out of frontline work because I didn't want to burn out. And I was starting to become calloused to death. As with all of the opioid and the drug poisoning, and then with the fentanyl, it was just, I wasn't having the time to mourn for these relationships that I made through supporting these individuals in our community. And then they would pass. And then all of a sudden, maybe a day later, somebody else would pass. And then somebody else would pass, and somebody else would pass, and somebody else would pass. And when you have no closure and you have no time to grieve, that's not right. These are individuals. These are community members. These are spiritual spirits of people that we had connections with. And when things are just happening so quick, that's not what life's about, especially when you're talking about someone passing that you have a relationship with. People need closure. People need time to grieve. And COVID was really complicating a lot of that for me. So I made a decision that I wanted to get out of frontline work. And there was an opportunity to go to the college, so I went there. Can't say enough about Conestoga College. Great place.
When you talk about land stewardship, you're trying to craft something. But there must be these ongoing environmental rigors that are detrimental to the space. What I'm talking about is there's still the sound of traffic nearby, right? There's possibly hydro lines. There's litter to deal with. How do you work within a space that kind of is forever going to just still kind of encroach on you with its sights and sounds?
Yes, that is a good question. And it always happens wherever we go. There's the airplanes going over, there's the hydro lines, there's traffic. But we do the best we can do in the moment with what we have, That's what we do. We can't get hung up on what's going on all around us, because what we do is we want to make that connection with the land. Making that connection with the land helps to connect with ourselves. And then it also gives us the ability to do our ceremonies. But yes, you're absolutely correct with the airplanes, with the trains, right? The trains, planes, and automobiles, you can hear them all of the time. You can smell it. You can smell it from the expressways. But what do? We just refocus ourselves. We go inside. And we're grateful for the opportunity in the land that we do have right now in order for us to do our ceremonies, in order for us to do our healings, in order for us to start educating people or helping people unlearn. That's what we do.
You're so articulate in how you are expressing the work that you're doing, and we really appreciate how much you're sharing with us.
And the gratitude.
You touched on something earlier, and then Marshall, I think, even expanded on that. But I heard you say something earlier that you're working within a delicate ecosystem that's not yours. We don't often hear people talk about that. It's something that Marshall and I feel very deeply about. But you're acknowledging that, hey, we're going into this space and disrupting what's already there to create a safer space, right? Can you just elaborate a little bit on that, about what that experience is like? Like you said, I'm not bringing in 50, 100 people to get this done in a weekend. We are going to do this respectfully, and it's going to look like this.
Well, it's creation that we're working within the boundaries of. And that's what we always have to remember. We have to remember how we got here and what our responsibilities are as humans, right? As humans, as spiritual people having a human experience. And a lot of people have forgot about that due to the isms, right? Due to capitalism, due to, they say the worst thing, the worst disease that was ever gifted to man was the disease of greed. Greed influences people to do some things that are not thinking about the 7 generations that are coming behind us. So when we talk about land stewardship, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about stewarding the land. As Indigenous people, we don't own anything. Yes, we have a lot of really, really cool things. We have a lot of sacred items, but we do not own anything. And that's what gives us, with the Indigenous worldview, that's where we live in harmony, because we have a responsibility as stewards of the land. And that's the difference in between land stewardship and land ownership. When people own the land, they buy the land, and they think because they bought the land, that gives them rights to destroy the land, gives them rights to deplete all the natural resources, gives them rights to pollute the water, pollute the soil. That's not what we do. That's not what we do at all, because we believe we're connected to everything around us that we see. We believe we're connected to the 2-legged, to the 4-legged, to the winged ones, and the swimmers. We believe we're connected to those 4 winds. My name is North Wind Man. So yes, we have that connection. We believe we're connected to those crawlers. We believe we're connected to all of the plants, all of the medicines. We believe we're connected to the trees. We have the same DNA as a tree. You know, when you cut open a tree, it almost looks just like a fingerprint. And we believe we're connected to those rocks and the minerals and the mountains and those rivers and the streams and those oceans, all within that circle of life as an equal. That's what we have right there. That equality. That's where people forget about it. As humans, we think we're at the top of the chain. We are not at the top of the chain. We're actually at the bottom, because we're the only species that has to depend on everybody, all those other species to survive. The fish don't rely on us. The birds don't rely on us. Those moose, those bears don't rely on us. The geese don't rely on us. Those ants don't rely on us. Those centipedes don't rely on us. Those spiders don't rely on us. We are the only ones that have to rely on everything else in creation to survive. And we think we're at the top, but actually we are at the bottom. We are so far at the bottom that it's, I just can't believe how everybody, with their privilege and entitlement, where they think, yes, we're number one. We're at the top of the food chain. No, you are not. You can hold that belief, but that's a wrong belief. And we talk about those truths at Crowshield Lodge.
Marshall, let's take a break to hear from this week's sponsor.
Hi, friends of the Bonn Park podcast. This is Paige Warner. I am so grateful for Sara and Marshall's support over the years and for all of you who tune in. You're currently listening to my new single, Right Thing, which comes out July 15th. Pre-saves start July 5th, so head to pagewarner.ca or find me on socials at Paige Warner Music.
Why is your presence so inviting? How are those lips so enticing? Boy, I've been here before. Can't take any more. Not trying to do the right thing.
And now back to the show.
The first time I heard about a residential school was 15 years ago. I interviewed a man named Mojo, who was a street busker. And Mojo had been homeless at times in his life, but in this case, he had a place to stay. And in our interview, when we talked about his backstory and him growing up in Timmins, he talked about stealing a bicycle as a kid and then being sent to a residential school. And he said to me, Marshall, he goes, those Christian brothers were not good to me. And I wasn't quite able to process what all he was saying in the interview. So I went and did some reading after, but that was my introduction to hearing about residential schools. What would have been your introduction? When would you have first heard about residential schools and that something was not right going on there?
Yeah. Thanks, Marshall. That's a good question. It's delicate. It's raw. And the first time I heard about it was when I was 20 years old and I met my biological father. My sister called me up on a Saturday and she said, "Hey, bro, what are you doing?" I was 20, so I was paying room and board with some friends and I was partying. I said, "I'm partying. What do you think I'm doing?" She says, "I'm coming over to your house within half an hour and I'm bringing somebody with me." And I said, "Oh, yeah? Who are you bringing?" She says, "I'm bringing our father." And then it was just like dead silence. A wave almost knocked me over of emotions. And then I called my foster dad. And I talked to him about it. And he says, "Meet your dad, meet your father. This is something you've always wanted." So I met my dad. And I told him, as soon as I saw my dad, I said, "I don't know whether to hug you or to punch you right in the face. It's great that you're here now, but where were you all those years that we needed you?" He says, "I understand." He says, "I have a lot of explaining to do, and we have a lot of catching up to do, and I'm never going to leave you again." And he didn't for 18 years. Marshall, that was my first experience because growing up, I had a lot of whys, a lot of unanswered questions as to why I didn't have parents. Why am I a foster child? Why is this happening to me? But once I met my father and my uncles and my aunts, I started to get some answers to those whys. I'm the first generation on my dad's side that was able to go home after school. My grandmother was in the residential schools. My dad, my uncles, and my aunts had a horrendous impact on my family. And then I started finding out where my family went. And my dad was in 3 different residential schools, but where they all met up was at Shingwak, which is now Algoma University in Sault Ste. Marie. The awesome thing about that is regardless of how terrible and horrendous those stories were, I was able to start hearing them from my uncles and my aunts. I was able to start hearing them from my dad. They were so painful because of that abuse that they went through when they were very, very young. I have a cousin who's 75 years old. He went back to Shingwak Residential School about 5 or 6 years ago when he was around 70 years old. He had to go back and find that room that they put him in when he was 5 years old. They took him out of the bush. He didn't speak English. All he spoke was Cree. But he had to go back and reclaim the spirit of that little boy who was put in that room, who was crying and who wet his pants and who couldn't speak English and who had no family around. He had to go back and reclaim that spirit of that little boy as a man who was 70 years old to start repairing that wreckage of the past. And that's what I found out today. You know, after he told me that, I've come to terms that sometimes in our lives, we have to go back in order to go forward. And sometimes when we go back, we have to deal with those things that we've been avoiding for such a long time. But those things that we've been avoiding for such a long time are pieces of us. We need to go back and reclaim them to be whole again. So yeah, Marshall, with my dad, started finding out about the residential schools. My uncle is, he's TRC, big in the TRC. He's actually the children of Shingwak. Every year, all the past students from Shingwak Residential School would get together, you know, and I can remember the first time that I went with my family, with my uncles and my aunts and my dad. There was like hundreds and hundreds of people gathering. I haven't gone in a couple years, but I've seen those pictures now. There's about 100 people gathering. They've all passed. They've all passed away. Those children that they're finding, those 215 children that they found last year around this time, they woke up a country to all of the horrendous things that have happened in those residential schools. As Indigenous family members, we have always known that there's children connected to each school. We've known this for a very long time. When we tried to talk to it about the government, they say you don't have any proof. There's no proof about those children. But now there's proof. Now there is proof, and now they have to listen. But it's not only time for the government to listen, it's time for the churches to listen, because they all had a part in those schools. And then people today, they start to wonder why they give Indigenous people labels, and they tell us to get over it. You know, it happened a long time ago. It wasn't my generation. Well, you know, the last residential school that closed was in 1996. Not that long ago.
It's not long at all.
No. And then they wonder why there's so many Indigenous men and women incarcerated. They wonder why there's so many children in care. They wonder why Indigenous homelessness is an issue. They wonder why addiction is an issue. Well, you know, those residential schools were developed to take the Indian out of the child. You break that child, you break that family. You break that nation, and you break down that community. And it was all in the name of land. That's what they wanted.
Land
and they got
ownership.
what they wanted. They got what they wanted. But now as Indigenous people, we have to heal. And it's going to take us a very long, very, very, very long time to heal. Pro Shield Lodge, we give people that ability. What if it was your family members or somebody's family members where those children were taken away from your family at a very young age? And then they lost their culture. They lost their language. They lost their identity, which keeps them connected to the original people of this land. What if we stopped acknowledging the people that we lost in the war and how they fought for freedom It's the same thing. It is the same thing. What if we stop celebrating all of these days to acknowledge who the settlers are? What if we stop celebrating Canada Day? What if we stop doing all of these things that are based and that are through a colonialist lens? What if we started taking things away from settlers who have privilege? What if we started taxing them for their land? What if we started taxing them for mineral rights? What if we started taxing them for gas? What if we, like, this is all of the things. They just keep taking and taking and taking and taking because it's privilege. It's privilege. Wrong is wrong. What happened was wrong. And it was wrong for somebody else's gain. So I don't know if there's a low wrong, a medium wrong, and a high wrong. Like, I'm not sure. Like, I just know that wrong is wrong. And when there's an umbrella of wrongness and there's a cloud of it that people don't want to talk about, that's probably because they don't want to be accountable and they don't want to lose something. And they don't want to admit something. We are living the after effects of those residential schools. That's why I'm doing my best to stop that intergenerational dysfunction and trauma going into my daughters and into my granddaughter. I'm doing my best to stop it. But when you don't want to acknowledge a wrong, there's something wrong there. There's something wrong there. I think there's a privilege. There's a privilege there that is unspoken of.
So when you stepped into Conestoga College to be an educator, you felt right away there was a support system there that was going to be allow you to craft a space and environment to teach, that to do what you needed to do?
No, Marshall. No. I went there because one of my mentors worked there, Mine Henry. I also went there because my colleague, Christina Restuel, I have a relationship with her. And I went there to hopefully start seeing our community through a different lens. I don't like change. What happened to me as a kid, how many changes I had in my life with being moved around from a foster home to group homes to youth detention centers to being incarcerated at a young age, I really struggle with change. I also know that the only way that I can continue to keep growing is to step outside of my comfort zone. So that's what I do. I do it all the time. I do public speaking. I do things like this. If you would have known me growing up, I was shy. I didn't have a voice. I didn't have any esteem or confidence. Once I found my voice and my culture, it gave me something to talk about. I have a story. So do a lot of other people. My story will help people. My story's raw. It's about trauma. It's about addiction, but it's about hope. It's about identity. It's about being a visionary. And I believe I was gifted a second chance at life. And all that the Creator wants back in return is for me to instill positive change, big or small, in myself, in the community that I live in, and also in creation. I'm going to share something with you about spirituality versus religion. I had a friend of mine who, there was an Indigenous World Conference a few years ago. His name is Max Salas, Dr. Max Salas. He was representing the Anishinaabe people at this World Religion Conference. He was a panelist of all these other panelists. And there was a question that came to him. This question that came to Mac was, is God and the Creator the same person? Is it the same thing? Is it the same entity? Mac put his head down. He says, I was hoping this question would come to me. He says, I'm going to answer it. He says, no, God and the Creator are not the same. The Creator is in you. The Creator is in me. The Creator is in everything that we can see outside, in the grass, in the trees, in the air, in the birds, in the fish, in the soil. The Creator is love, unconditional love. God was brought to us as Indigenous people over a big, vast ocean of salt water. God was brought to us from a boat in a little black book by these men wearing long robes, the Jesuits. That's how God was brought to us. And this is what I'm adding. If God has all of these commandments of how you're supposed to live your life, and how you're supposed to help others, why did your God do such bad things to our people in the residential schools? That's not a God that I want to be a part of. That's not a God that I want to know. I like the Creator. I align with the Creator. I like to share that. Because if that God was such a beautiful and loving God, how could he do all those horrendous things to those children in the residential schools? How could he have done those horrendous things to my father? How could God have done those horrendous things to my aunts and to my uncles? Because they were all abused. They were all beaten. They were all sexually abused. They were all raped by these nuns or these priests that watched over these schools. That's not a God that I want to know. That's not a God that I want to follow. That God is not my God.